Good evening and welcome to the Daily Rambam. Today we're going to study the fourth chapter of the Foundations of Torah. My name is Rabbi Yossi Kagan, Director of Development and Education at Chabad Sholem Potomac. So the past few days we've been studying about God and about the world. The first two chapters of Rambam are dedicated to understanding the way God works and the Jewish belief in God. And the last two chapters, the chapter we learned yesterday, and the third chapter and the fourth chapter, which we will learn tonight, deal with the creation of the world and how the world exists naturally. It's a little bit of a complicated chapter, and we'll see at the end of the chapter why it's so important to be going through these laws. So chapter 4, Halacha Aleph. Arba Gufim Halalu, these four bodies, fire, wind, water, and earth, as we learned in chapter 3, every physical matter in this world is comprised of these four bodies. Again, these elements, these four bodies, are not to be confused with the elements we usually talk about, of the way things are created, about 100 elements, but these are rather four unique elements, as we see that they don't exist independently, but once they are combined, they create a new existence. And therefore, if you take a microscope, you won't necessarily find within one physical matter a little bit of fire or a little bit of water. So these four bodies of Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar, wind, fire, water, and earth are the fundamental elements of all the creations below the sky. Everything that exists under this firmament, be it man, beast, fowl, crawling creatures, fish, plant, metal, precious stones, pearl, building stones, mountains, or lumps of earth. The body of all these entities is a combination of these four fundamental elements. Thus, all the bodies which are found below the sky, with the exception of these four bodies, are a combination of matter and form. And their matter is a combination of these fundamental elements. These fundamental elements, however, are a combination of matter and form as they exist in a hilient state alone. So each physical matter has within it these four different golams, these four different bodies or elements. Each one individually only has one. The tendency of fire, now each one has its own natural way of existing, which we're all familiar with. The tendency of fire and wind is to ascend upwards from the depth of the earth towards the sky. The tendency of water and earth is to descend from the sky to the midpoint of the sky. If you take a flame, point it downwards, it's always going to go upwards. If you take water and you throw it upwards, it's always going to fall downwards. Same thing with earth. The gravity, earth and water gravitate downwards. Air and fire gravitate upwards. For the midpoint of the sky is the lowest point, below which nothing is lower. These tendencies are not a conscious matter, nor are they willful. Rather, it is a pattern affixed within them and a nature they were given. We learned in the previous chapters that some of the spheres and galaxies and stars have a mind on their own and are conscious of God. These natures of fire going upward doesn't know it's going upward. This is just the nature God gave it. Water is lighter than earth. Now each one has its own natural way of where it gravitates to, but they also have their own weights and their own, therefore where they exist. Water is lighter than earth, therefore it is found above it. Wind is lighter than water, therefore it hovers above it, above the water. Well, fire is even lighter than wind. Since these are the fundamental elements for all the bodies below the sky, the matter of every single body, man, animal, beast, fowl, fish, plant, metal, and stone is a combination of fire, wind, water, and earth. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar. In the process of the combination of these four, each one of them changes while they are being combined. Thus, the combination of the four fundamental elements does not resemble any one of the elements as it exists alone. Similarly, in any combination of them, there cannot be found even one portion of fire as exists alone, wind as it exists alone, water as it exists alone, nor earth as it exists alone. Rather, they have all changed and become a single body. So it's like becomes one big cholent where you cannot now, and becomes a new existence of an existence combined of all these four different bodies. of these four elements of fire, wind, water, and earth. Now, each body has a different combination of these four elements. It's not like every single physical matter should look the same, because there's a little bit of, there's difference of which one is going to be most pronounced or most influential. Each and every body, which is a combination of these four fundamental elements, will have a combination of cold and warmth, moistness and dryness. There are some bodies which have a more powerful concentration of the fundamental elements of fire, for example. Creatures with living souls have more fire, which is more dominant, the element of fire. Therefore, accordingly, they have a higher temperature. People are always hot because of this fire that we have within us. Conversely, there are some bodies with a more powerful concentration of the element of earth. For example, the stones, accordingly, they are very dry. Simply, some of them have bodies with a greater concentration of the elements of water. Accordingly, they are moist. So depending on what is most pronounced, what is most expressed, that is what the individual will look like. Again, this is not saying that you'll take apart, if you take apart any product, you'll find 80% fire. We know that we do have within us lots of water, and we have within us the elements of earth. But this is these four different elements, or the four different bodies, the way things exist, and the kind of the building blocks for every physical matter. In this manner, one may find one body with a warmer than another body, which in turn, which itself warm, which is itself warm, and one body drier than another body, which is itself dry. Similarly, there are bodies in which cold alone is noticeable, and other bodies in which moistness alone is noticeable. In some bodies, cold and dryness are equally noticeable. In others, warmth and dryness are equally noticeable. In others, warmth and moistness are equally noticeable. In others, warmth and moistness are equally noticeable. According to the predominance of the element that is found in the essential combination, the inclination and nature of that element will be expressed in the body, resulting from a mixture of all the elements. Halacha number 3. Every entity which is a combination of these four fundamental elements will ultimately decompose into them. Some will decompose after a mere few days, and others will decompose after many years. However, it is impossible for everything which is a combination of them not to decompose into them. It is impossible even for gold and rupee not to decompose and return to their fundamental elements, a portion becoming fire, a portion water, a portion wind, and a portion earth. So everything in this world that is comprised of these four elements will eventually separate and decompose. Even metals will decompose. It might take many, many years, more than maybe an apple decomposing, but it will eventually decompose because it is only made of a composition of different elements. Since every entity will, halacha 4, since every entity will decompose and separate into these four fundamental elements, why was Adam told, you will return to dust, implying that man will return to dust alone? Because the major part of man's composition is from dust. Every entity that decomposes will not return to the four fundamental elements immediately. Rather, it will decompose and change into another entity. That entity will in turn change into another entity until ultimately it will return to the elements. Thus, all entities are constantly returning to their essential state in a cycle. So this is what we know as the process of evolution, where different things turn into gases and different things turn into liquids, and these elements are constantly changing and decomposing, changing one element to the other, and that's because they have within them these elements. These four fundamental elements are in a constant state of flux with a certain portion, but never the entire matter, of one changing to another every day and every hour. So things change, items change, but you'll never have the element of fire decomposing or changing into wind or water, all disintegrating, turning into earth, or the idea of water getting lost. What is implied? A portion of the earth which is close to the water changes, dissolves, and becomes water. Similarly, a portion of the water which is close to the wind changes, evaporates, and becomes wind. A portion of the wind which is close to the fire changes, goes through a metamorphosis, and becomes fire. Similarly, a portion of the fire close to the wind goes through a metamorphosis, changes, contracts, and becomes wind. The wind which is close to the water changes, contracts, and becomes water. And the water which is close to the earth changes, contracts, and becomes earth. So every element which is next to the other one changes, and becomes like the other one. And this happens every minute, every second. As we're speaking, This is the idea of evolution, where things are constantly changing. The cycle of change goes on forever, but we'll never have a full element being changing and decomposing. This cycle of change proceeds little by little over time, over the course of time. The entire fundamental element will never change. For example, all the water will never become wind, nor all the wind fire, because it is impossible for the existence of one of the four fundamental elements to be nullified. Rather, a portion of the fire will change to wind, and a portion of the wind to fire. Similarly, between each pair of these four, change will go on in an unceasing, recurrent cycle. Halacha number 6. This cycle of change is caused by the revolution of the sphere. Its revolution causes the four fundamental elements to combine and thus forms the matter of men, living beasts, plants, stones, and metals. So as we spoke about in the earlier chapter, the Rambam lists 9 different spheres, and galaxies are constantly turning. And the cause for change is the spheres turning around us, and therefore turning things around and kind of like stirring the pot. And this causes the change that goes on between these elements. God gives each body the form appropriate to it through the angels of the 10th level, which are the form called Ishim. So we talked about the golem, which is the matter of how they're comprised of the 4 elements. And now the Rambam just mentioned that everything also has a form. The form here is not the shape, not the way it looks. That would be called the Torah, the description of the item. But here we're talking about Suda is the spiritual identity, the content of this physical matter. So every physical matter, let it be a blade of grass, has its own angel that is its content, that is basically its spiritual energy of this thing. And therefore, this is just a side note. This is very important to when we look at anything, not to look at it as stones, but rather look at it as godly energy. There's each stone has another angel. And we know that the Torah tells us that we have to be respectful even to stones. By not embarrassing them, by not acting disrespectful. So you'll never see, this is number 7, you'll never see matter without form or form without matter. It is the heart of man which is in its knowledge considers the bodies are found and knows that they are a combination of matter and form. So when you see a stone, you won't see the form, the spiritual energy, the angel that is within it. You'll just see the matter, but that doesn't mean just because you can't see it, that doesn't exist. How many colors, physical colors are there that you do not see? Your eye, physical eye, cannot see that color. How many sounds, physical sounds are there that you hear, physical ear cannot hear? That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There was recently, I got a WhatsApp message of a certain sound where the message was 50% of the people would hear it and 50% of the people will not hear it. And it was accurate. Playing the sound, I was able to hear it, but others in the room were not able to hear it. And I think it depended on age, but it's something that this is even physical sounds, physical eyes. We don't see everything. That doesn't mean they don't exist. So of course, we're talking about spiritual things, the form, the Suda, the content of things. Even though we don't see it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So every blade every blade of grass, every physical matter has an angel, has a spiritual energy to it as well. It appreciates that there are bodies. Now the eye of the heart does see these forms. It appreciates, meaning we understand that it exists, and we could understand a little bit about it. It appreciates that there are a lot of bodies whose matter is a combination of the 4 fundamental elements, bodies whose matter is simple and contains only one type of matter, and forms which have no matter and cannot be seen by the eye. The latter are discernible only to the eye of the heart. We can appreciate their existence just as we know the existence of the master of everything, though we do not see him with our own eyes. Just like we know that God exists, but we don't necessarily see God with our own eyes, but we know that God exists. Number 8, now we'll talk about the content of Suda of a human being, the Homo sapien. The soul of all flesh is the form which it was given by God. The extra dimension which is found in the soul of man is the form of man who is perfect in his knowledge. So yes, we have physical bodies, but within that physical body, again, you're not going to see it. It's not saying physical, but it's the Suda, the content, the purpose of the person is. That is his neshama, his soul. And God gave every human being a soul. Concerning this form, the Torah states, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. We say the image of God. We're talking about with having a soul, having a part of God within us. I granting man a form which he knows and comprehends ideas that are not material like the angels, not material, just like the angels who are formed without body, until he can reassemble them. This statement does not refer to the form of the body perceived by the eye, i.e. the mouth, the nose, the cheeks, and the remainder of the structure of the body. This is referred to as toar, appearance. As we describe, we talk about the description of something, of how it looks. That's toar. Here we're talking about the surah, which means form, the spiritual form. You can't see it with the eye. You can see it with the eye of the heart, but not the eye of not the fleshy eye. It is not the soul found in all living flesh which allows it to eat, drink, reproduce, feel, and think. Rather, knowledge is the form of this dimension of the soul, and it is concerning this form of the soul that the verse states, in our image and in our likeness. Frequently, this form is referred to as a nefesh or ruach. Therefore, one must be careful regarding these names, lest another person err regarding them. Each name reveals its characteristic. So as we know, there are different levels of the soul. Generally, there are 5 levels of the soul. The lowest level of the soul is what we call nefesh. The Rambam here is calling it neshama, but that is something that gives you the energy to eat and drink, but it doesn't necessarily give you purpose. Your ability to just do action is from the soul. From the soul that gives you, like the battery that batteries you up, powers you up. But then there's a higher level of soul, which is the element of the soul that you're able to comprehend things that you can't see, to be able to go into something bigger than you. It's not about you, it's about comprehending things that are not necessarily you. And this is the neshama. Halacha number 9. This form of a soul is not a combination of fundamental elements into which it will ultimately decompose, like any physical matter, but this is not comprised of any 4 elements, nor does it come from the neshama, so that it would require the neshama, as the neshama requires a body. Rather, is from God, from heaven. This is a gift from God, and therefore it exists before it comes into a body and after it leaves the body, and it does not get affected by it leaving the body. Therefore, when the matter of the body, which is a combination of fundamental elements, decomposes and the neshama ceases to exist, for the neshama exists only together with the body and requires the body for all its deeds, this form will not be cut off, for this form does not require the neshama for its deeds. Rather, it knows and comprehends knowledge, which is above matter, knows the creator of all things, and exists forever. In his wisdom, Solomon, King Shlomo HaMelech, gave this description: the dust will return to the earth as it originally was, and the ruach here referring to the soul, will return to God who granted. The level of the soul, which is given to us from God, and transcends the body. Halacha 10. This kind of sums up the last 4 chapters that we just studied. All these concepts which we have explained in this context are like a drop in the bucket. They are deep matters, nevertheless their depth does not approach the depth of the subject matter or the first and second chapters. So the first 2 chapters talked more about God, and therefore obviously there's a lot more depth to that. These chapters are dealing more with the world, the depth of the world, and although the Rambam says he's only giving you little tidbits, little pointers, we are not getting to the full depth of this. As you can imagine, you're not going to understand science and chemistry all in 15 minutes or 20 minutes. The explanation of all the subject matters in this 3rd and 4th chapters referred to as Ma'aseh Bereshis. The 3rd and 4th chapters of is called Ma'aseh Bereshis, which means the action of creation of the world. And the first 2 chapters are referred to as Ma'aseh Merkava, which Ma'aseh Merkava is what we refer to God. What is the difference? Halacha 11. What is the difference between the subject matter of Ma'aseh Merkava and the subject matter of Ma'aseh Bereshit? The first 2 chapters versus the 3rd and 4th chapter. The subject matter of Ma'aseh Merkava should never be expounded upon, even to a single individual, unless he is wise and capable of understanding, in which instance he is given fundamental points. So you do not teach the Ma'aseh Merkava, points about God, to the masses, only to someone who is a single individual who is worthy and a great genius, a great scholar in many other areas. In contrast, the subject matter of Ma'aseh Bereshis may be taught to an individual, even though he is incapable of comprehending it with his own powers of understanding alone. He may be informed about everything that he can possibly know about these matters. Why are they not taught publicly in these matters? Because not every person has the vast knowledge necessary to grasp the interpretation and explanation of these matters in a complete manner. So they're not taught publicly, broadcasted, because people might take it out of context. They might not understand exactly what you're saying, and they might then misappropriate or misuse your words. But if someone is of great knowledge, if someone is a great student, and you could teach him the Ma'aser Merkava. If someone's a good student, might not be the same intellectual level, you could teach him Ma'aser Bereshis. When a person, halacha number 12, when a person indicates on these matters and recognizes, when a person meditates on these matters and recognizes all of the creation, the angels, the spheres, man and the like, and appreciates the wisdom of the Holy One, blessed be He, in all these creations, he will add to his love for God, his soul will thirst, and his flesh will long with love for God, blessed be He. He will stand in awe and fear of from his humble, lowly, and base nature when he compares himself to one of the great and holy bodies. How much more so when comparing himself to the pure forms which are separate from matter and do not share any connection with it. He will see himself as a vessel full of embarrassment and shame, empty and lacking. So the Rambam just gave us a little bit of insight why he goes into these 4 chapters. As we know, Rambam is a book of laws and only talks about the law. Anything that is relevant to the law, he will discuss. If it's not relevant to law, he will not discuss. The Rambam's not here to teach us science, philosophy, at least not in this book. He has other books that deal with that, other compilations. So why are we talking about philosophy here and science? Because in order to properly fulfill the mitzvahs that the Rambam is telling us about, to love God, to know God, to fear God, you have to meditate about God, about how great God is. So when you meditate about these concepts of how great the world is, and this is something that scientists and biologists have the opportunity to do, and those that the more we learn about the world, when we see how great and intricate the world is, we realize that this all comes from God, and there's something greater than us, and how little we are. And when we do that, we just fall in great love with God. So in order to properly fulfill the mitzvah of loving God, Rambam's giving me this introduction, or at least some pointers to tell me how to properly do the mitzvah. So this is very relevant to the law of how to fulfill the mitzvah of loving God and to know God. The matters discussed, halacha 13, the final halacha, the matters discussed in these 4 chapters concerning these 5 mitzvahs are what the sages of the early generations termed the pardes, which means a garden. As it related, 4 entered the pardes. The Talmud tells about 4 great sages that enter the pardes, enter these secrets of the Torah, and not all sages walked out in peace. Only one did. And that's how sensitive this information is. I maintain that it is not proper for a person to stroll in the pardes unless he has filled his belly with bread and meat. Bread and meat here refer to the knowledge of what is permitted and what is forbidden, the basic laws, and similar matters concerning other mitzvot. Even though the sages refer to these as small matters, for our sages said in the Talmud, a great matter, this refers to Ma'aser Merkava, talking about God. A small matter, the Talmud says, this refers to the debates of Abaye and Rava, 2 great Talmudists that would debate many of the laws of what to do and what not to do. Nevertheless, it is fitting for them, so even though it's called small matters, nevertheless, it's fitting for them to be given precedence because they settle a person's mind. So not to focus too much on the Ma'aser Merkava, but first focus on what to do and not to do. Also, they are the great good with which the Holy One, blessed be He, has granted to allow for stable living within the world and the acquisition of the life to the world to come. They can be known in their totality by the great and the small man or woman, whether granted expansive knowledge or limited knowledge. So this concludes chapter 4, and I'd like to conclude with the following disclaimer, and that is, although we discussed that this is very sensitive material and generally shouldn't be taught publicly, and here we're doing this live, and it's available, and I'm not the only one. A lot of this information, and we know Hasidus today is on the rise. People are studying deep secrets of the Torah. And the reason for that is because as we get closer to the times of Mashiach, which is we're closer than we ever were, and Mashiach is coming today. And we say this, we see the world is getting ready for Mashiach. Look how much the world changed the past 100 years. Is unbelievable. And as we get closer to the times of Mashiach, we have to start getting in the atmosphere of Mashiach and in preparing ourselves. And one of the things we know when Mashiach comes is the secrets of the Torah and God's knowledge will fill the world. And as we get close to that time, today these learnings, which were classified information that weren't even available to the FBI and CIA, are available today to the masses. And not only are they available, but it's encouraged for everyone to study these things. And could be found in Hasidus. It could be found today in so many different places. And this is the proper way to fulfill these mitzvahs. With this, we conclude the 4 chapters, and we move on to the 5th chapter, which already starts getting more of the formal laws of the mitzvot, Kiddush Hashem, and so on.